How to escape the big man trap. Born into a Hollywood dynasty, Ryan Hurst refused to be just another muscle-bound extra. From a paralyzed hero to a broken Norse god, this is how he redefined what it means to be a titan. The narrative trajectory of Ryan Hurst is a truly remarkable, multifaceted, and deeply inspiring study in how genetic predisposition, environmental influence, and a deliberate, almost monastic commitment to the craft of acting can forge one of the most uniquely imposing and emotionally resonant presences in modern cinema. Born into the very heart of the entertainment industry in Santa Monica as the son of Rick Hurst, a widely respected character actor known for his comedic timing and warmth, Ryan did not simply slide into the comfortable pre-paved grooves of Hollywood nepotism. Instead, he chose a path of profound artistic resistance, intellectual exploration, and physical transformation. Growing up, he was surrounded by the superficial glitz, the relentless noise, and the often hollow machinery of the industry, yet he consciously cultivated an internal, brooding power that seemed entirely at odds with the typical sun-driven, carefree California archetype. While his father's was celebrated for a lighter, more accessible screen presence, Ryan began an intentional and rigorous evolution, moving away from the comedic shadow of his lineage toward a physically imposing, psychologically dense form of dramatic art. This journey wasn't merely about hitting the gym to gain bulk. It was about developing a sophisticated, wordless physical language that could communicate the crushing weight of the human condition. His early years were spent not just auditioning, but observing the quiet, heavy intensity of the world around him with a telescopic focus. Studying the way pain and resilience manifest in the body, he chose to become a craftsman who prioritized the internal engine of a character, the trauma, the silence, and the resilience, over the external rewards of fleeting stardom. By the time he stepped onto his first major professional sets, Hurst had already built a foundation of gravity, a palpable sense that he occupied more space, not just because of his literal height, but because of the immense emotional mass he carried within his frame, setting the stage for a career defined by men of immense strength and even deeper, more complex sorrow. He sought the heavy roles, the ones that required him to dig into the marrow of human experience, transforming himself from a Hollywood legacy child into a self-made titan of the dramatic screen, whose presence demands total attention from the very first frame. Every movement he makes on screen feels weighted with history, every silence filled with unspoken dialogue, marking him as a performer who doesn't just play a role, but haunts it with a ghostly, undeniable power. The question of whether an actor truly captures a soul or merely imitates a life was answered with resounding, historical finality when Ryan Hurst took on the mantle of Jerry Bertier in the Disney classic Remember the Titans. This project was the definitive crucible that refined his public image, transitioning him from a recognizable face in the crowd to a formidable, world-class talent capable of leading a major production with profound sensitivity. To play Bertier, a real-life legendary high school football star whose life was irrevocably and tragically changed by a devastating car accident, Hurst had to master a delicate, high-stakes emotional tightrope that few young actors could manage. He had to embody the initial, almost blinding arrogance of an elite athlete, the golden boy of a racially divided Alexandria, Virginia, and then, with devastating, surgical precision, dismantle that persona piece by piece. When the narrative shifts to the aftermath of Bertier's paralysis, Hurst didn't rely on the easy tropes of melodrama or superficial tears. Instead, he tapped into a primal, quiet vulnerability that resonated far beyond the confines of a traditional sports movie. He portrayed the physical and psychological transition of a man losing his legs but finding his true character, showing how the loss of physical utility could lead to the gain of spiritual clarity and racial reconciliation in a time of extreme social unrest. His performance was so grounded, so profoundly felt, in every muscle of his face and every tremor in his voice, that for many viewers, the line between the historical Jerry Bertier and Hurst's portrayal became permanently and beautifully blurred. He didn't just act out the tragedy, he immortalized the man's spirit, demonstrating that his massive physical stature was merely a vessel for an even larger, more compassionate heart. This performance marked his official arrival as a master of the dramatic arts, proving that he could handle the weight of a true life legacy with grace, respect, and an unparalleled emotional intensity that left a permanent mark on the hearts of millions of moviegoers worldwide, turning a sports story into a universal parable of human resilience. We are dedicated to building a digital archive of human resilience, but these deep dives require immense resources. If you value this level of research, please like and subscribe. It tells the algorithm that deep-form history still matters in a world of fleeting content. Help us keep these legends alive. After the explosive, career-altering success of Remember the Titans, Hurst found himself at a dangerous and all too common crossroads for actors of his specific, towering physical build. The dumb muscle trap in the predatory, often unimaginative waters of Hollywood, typecasting a man who stands 6'4" and carries significant physical mass is almost always relegated to the roles of mindless henchmen, one-dimensional bullies, or silent security guards, whose only job is to look intimidating in the background. However, Hurst navigated this precarious period with a level of strategic precision and artistic integrity that revealed his long-term vision for his artistic legacy. He consciously and bravely avoided the easy, lucrative paychecks of mindless action flicks that sought only to use his body as a prop. Instead, he selected diverse, strategically complex projects like the visceral Vietnam War epic We Were Soldiers and the ambitious, Spielberg-produced sci-fi miniseries Taken. In We Were Soldiers, he played Sergeant Ernie Savage, utilizing a rigorous method-acting discipline that prioritized the internal resonance of a soldier under extreme, life-threatening duress over mere cinematic bravado or action hero cliches. He spent hundreds of hours honing his ability to convey a range as vast and varied as his frame, proving to directors like Randall Wallace that he could be the intellectual and emotional anchor of a scene even when surrounded by the chaos of pyrotechnics and simulated warfare. This period of his career was essential in establishing his ironclad reputation as a disciplined craftsman, one who viewed his physical size not as his primary tool of the trade, but as a vast blank canvas upon which he could paint intricate, often painful, and deeply nuanced human experiences. He was building a resume that shouted his versatility, ensuring that Hollywood would eventually see him not just as a big man, but as a big actor, capable of the most subtle, delicate, and heart-wrenching performances imaginable, a performer who could carry the weight of an entire era's trauma, the evolution of a character from a peripheral, temporary guest to the very moral compass and emotional heartbeat of a long-running, multi-season series is a rare phenomenon in the world of television, yet that is exactly the miracle that occurred when Kurt Sutter cast Ryan Hurst as Harry Opie Winston in the Shakespearean outlaw drama Sons of Anarchy. Originally intended for a brief limited arc that might have seen him disappear after a few episodes, the character of Opie underwent a radical organic transformation because of the profound soulful sorrow and immense gravity that Hurst brought to every single frame. From the moment he appeared on screen, bearded, towering, and wearing a weathered leather vest that felt less like a costume and more like a second skin, Hurst infused the outlaw biker saga with an unexpected, almost tragic weight that balanced the show's intense violence. He turned what could have been a standard tough guy role into a series pillar, a man defined not by the violence he committed with his hands, but by the violence he desperately, almost heroically tried to avoid for the sake of his children and his flickering soul. His chemistry with Charlie Hunnam's Jax Teller became the central emotional heartbeat of the entire show, representing a brotherhood that was simultaneously sacred and suffocating, a bond forged in blood and maintained through impossible loyalty. Hurst's performance was characterized by a quiet intensity that became his trademark. He could dominate a room filled with shouting, aggressive men without saying a single word, his soulful eyes reflecting a man who was in a constant state of mourning for a life he could never quite reclaim. He became the audience's surrogate in the world of Samcro, the one character whose inherent goodness and desire for peace made the surrounding chaos feel like a true tragedy, rather than just a sensationalist crime drama grounding the entire series in a deep, relatable humanity that made the stakes feel personal for every viewer. The true test of Hurst's dramatic range and emotional endurance came when the scripts for Sons of Anarchy demanded that Opie Winston lose every single thing he held dear in the world, one piece at a time, through the brutal, heart-wrenching loss of his wife, Donna, a death caused by the very club he called family, and later the cold-blooded murder of his father, Piney. Hurst portrayed the anatomy of grief with a harrowing, almost unbearable precision that left audiences breathless and emotionally drained. He depicted a man whose soul was being systematically and cruelly eroded by the very institution he swore loyalty to, a man trapped in a cycle of vengeance and regret that he couldn't escape despite his best efforts. The concept of reluctant violence became the central theme of his performance. When Opie did eventually strike back, it felt like a tragic explosion of years of suppressed pain, betrayal, and hopelessness rather than a simple choice of aggression. Hurst anchored the show's often chaotic, fast-paced, and Machiavellian narrative in a tragic, grounded reality that felt all too real for those who have experienced profound loss. He played the role with a heavy, slouching gait that suggested the physical weight of his grief was literally pressing down on his spine, threatening to crush him into the earth, under the weight of his own leather vest and his father's legacy. This wasn't just acting in the traditional sense, it was a visceral, total transformation of the self, an immersion into the darker corners of the human psyche that required him to face his own deepest fears. Fans didn't just watch Opie Winston, they felt a deep, protective kinship with him, a testament to Hurst's unique ability to find and highlight the profound humanity within a subculture that is so often dismissed by society as one-dimensional, criminal, or irredeemable. The breaking point of Opie was not a single moment of cinematic madness, but a slow, agonizing, and meticulously mapped-out descent into ruin that Hurst performed across multiple seasons, with the skill of a master dramatist at the absolute height of his powers, turning a biker into a tragic hero of mythic proportions. "I got this." These three simple, monosyllabic words have carved a permanent, jagged place in the history of modern television. Few phrases in the medium's long and storied history have ever carried such a devastating weight of voluntary sacrifice or continued to haunt a global fan base so long after the final frame has faded to black. The final sacrifice of Opie Winston, occurring in the sterile, cold, and indifferent environment of a prison hallway, remains one of the most significant and emotionally scarring cultural touchstones of the entire prestige TV era. For Ryan Hurst, filming that scene was not merely the end of a long-term job or a contract. It was the traumatic, ritualistic conclusion of a deeply personal, years-long era of his life that had fundamentally changed him. He famously struggled with the psychological process of letting the character go, experiencing a form of character mourning that led him to host a private, ritualistic funeral where his fellow cast members helped him cut off his iconic beard, a symbolic shedding of the skin he had inhabited so completely that it had become part of his physical and mental identity. This chapter of his career solidified his status in the industry as a master of tragic storytelling, an actor capable of making a fictional death feel like a personal, visceral loss to millions of strangers. The emotional toll of that performance was visible both on and off screen, marking a legacy of sacrifice that resonated with anyone who has ever felt the crushing, impossible demand of loyalty versus self-preservation. Even a decade later, the image of Hurst's Opie, standing tall and resolute in the face of certain brutal death for the sake of his brother, remains the definitive symbol of the show's tragic core, ensuring that Hurst's name would forever be synonymous with characters of unparalleled integrity, massive physical power, and an even more massive heart that ultimately broke for those he loved, leaving a void in the show that could never be filled. Following the cultural explosion and the heavy emotional drainage of Sons of Anarchy, Hurst faced the daunting, almost impossible task of reinventing his screen presence once again to avoid being Opie forever. In the eyes of the public, he chose a path that shocked many. He decided to vanish so completely into a literal, waking nightmare that he became entirely unrecognizable to the naked eye. Joining the massive ensemble cast of The Walking Dead as the formidable and terrifying villain known as Beta, Hurst underwent a physical and psychological metamorphosis that stunned even his most loyal followers. Shedding the leather and the noble outlaw persona, he donned the horrific skin mask of the Whisperers, utilizing his massive height and a new, silent, predatory physicality to create a threat unlike anything seen before in the zombie apocalypse. Beta was not just a villain, he was an avatar of pure, looming terror, a character who required absolutely no dialogue to instill a primal, bone-chilling fear in both the protagonists and the global audience. Hurst understood with brilliant dark clarity that to play a true monster one must first understand the hollow void where the human soul used to be, and the reasons why a man would choose to wear the face of the dead. He moved with a calculated, terrifying grace, almost like a natural disaster, or an apex predator in human form, turning his 6'4" frame into a weapon of psychological warfare that dominated every scene. He entered, making the walkers themselves seem secondary to the threat he posed. This role was a masterclass in how an actor can command a screen and tell a complex story when their most recognizable features, their eyes and their smile, are completely hidden from view by the face of a corpse, forcing him to rely on pure presence. The unique challenge of playing Beta served as a rigorous, almost experimental acting exercise that few performers would dare to attempt. How do you communicate complex, multi-layered emotion and backstory when you are stripped of your most vital tool, the human face, in the primitive, nihilistic, and regressive world of the Whisperers? The face is a luxury that has been discarded, replaced by the decaying, dried flesh of the dead as a means of survival and philosophy. This forced Hurst to master the ancient and difficult art of physical acting to an extreme, almost theatrical or operatic degree. He had to convey deep, simmering menace and unwavering and cult-like loyalty to his leader Alpha, and a twisted post-apocalyptic sense of religious devotion through nothing but the micro-movements of his eyes and the looming tectonic weight of his posture. Every subtle tilt of the head, every heavy, deliberate footfall that seemed to shake the ground, and every low-frequency vocal modulation was a conscious artistic choice, designed to tell the story of a shattered man who had found a horrific new purpose in the ruins of civilization. This performance proved his absolute, unquestionable mastery of the craft. He could be terrifying and pitiable in the same breath, all while buried under kilograms of leather, dirt, and heavy prosthetics. He showed the world that an actor's greatest tool isn't necessarily their facial expressions, but their ability to inhabit and manipulate the very space around them, projecting a raw, primal energy that can be felt by the viewer through the screen, transcending the physical barriers of the costume and the genre, making Beta one of the most memorable antagonists in television history. Even within the repulsive skin of an irredeemable monster like Beta, Ryan Hurst's artistic instinct was to search for a shred of tragic buried humanity, the ghost of the man who existed before the world ended and the music stopped. During his final, hallucination-filled moments of life, as he was finally overcome by the walking dead he once controlled, Hurst's performance transcended the traditional boundaries of the horror genre. As Beta succumbed to the very world he had helped turn into a living nightmare, Hurst acted through heavy, restrictive prosthetics to humanize a creature that had been the primary source of nightmare fuel for multiple seasons. He tapped into the character's hidden past as a famous world-renowned musician, a man of art sensitivity and fame who had been broken by the collapse of society, suggesting a soul that had been shattered and then rebuilt into something grotesque and defensive as a form of survival. This uncanny ability to unearth the soul within the antagonist is the defining hallmark of Hurst's entire career. He does not believe in villains in the simplistic, traditional sense. He believes in broken, traumatized people who make terrible, world-shaking choices out of a sense of misplaced necessity or pain. The demise of Beta was a complex, beautifully orchestrated blend of top-tier special effects and raw, emotional acting, highlighting a unique talent for finding a strange, haunting beauty in the macabre and making the audience feel a fleeting, confusing sense of loss for a character they had spent years fearing and loathing, proving that Hurst can make us empathize with even the most terrifying of monsters by showing us the man beneath the skin. Transitioning from the physical sets of television to the high-tech digital realm of performance capture, Hurst took on what many critics, scholars, and gamers consider to be his most complex and emotionally demanding role to date, the god of thunder, Thor. However, this was not the polished, brightly colored, superheroic Thor popularized by the Marvel Cinematic Universe or the comic books of the past. In the groundbreaking, narrative-heavy God of War Ragnarok, Santa Monica Studio cast Hurst to deliver a version of Thor that was much closer to the dark, gritty, and brutal roots of the original Norse myths, a god who was essentially a high-functioning disaster, burdened by crippling depression, chronic, destructive alcoholism, and the crushing, inescapable weight of a prophecy that predicted his own violent end at the hands of destiny. Hurst utilized cutting-edge motion capture technology to simulate the heaviness of a divine figure who was physically invincible but spiritually and emotionally bankrupt. He portrayed Thor as a hedonistic wreck, a man who drank to the point of stupor just to forget the endless blood on his hands and the systemic, multi-generational trauma inflicted upon him by his manipulative and narcissistic father Odin. This version of Thor was a direct mirror to many of Hurst's previous live-action roles, a giant of a man who was ultimately a prisoner of his own immense strength and the impossible soul-crushing expectations of his family lineage. By bringing a sense of dad-bod realism, deep-seated insecurity, and genuine psychological pain to a deity, Hurst redefined what a god could look like and feel like in modern interactive media, making the divine feel painfully, almost uncomfortably human and forcing players to confront the tragedy of a life spent in service to a monster. The true, earth-shaking power of Hurst's performance as Thor lay in his masterful vocal delivery and the subtle nuances of his performance capture data. He had to deliver lines that carried the thunderous, terrifying rage of a deity capable of killing giants with a single blow, while simultaneously allowing his voice to crack with the quiet, drunken, and pathetic sorrow of a neglected and abused son seeking just a scrap of approval from a cold, calculating father. The core of his performance was the toxic, deeply manipulative relationship between Thor and Odin, where Hurst's vocal range allowed him to switch from terrifying displays of divine power to heartbreaking moments of small, childlike vulnerability in a single, fluid breath. He proved to the industry that the mastery of performance extends far into the digital and virtual realms, treating the voice-over and motion capture sessions with the exact same method, intensity, physical preparation, and emotional research he brought to his biggest film roles. His voice became a resonant, gravelly instrument, capable of conveying the immense fatigue of a man who had lived too many violent lifetimes and killed too many people in the name of a father who didn't love him back. This role introduced Hurst to an entirely new global generation of fans, solidifying his status as a geek culture icon who could dominate any medium, from the prestige television of FX to the highest tier of interactive storytelling in the gaming world, proving that his talent is truly platform agnostic and that he can breathe life into characters made of pixels with the same intensity as those made of flesh and blood. The universal reception to his portrayal of Thor was nothing short of a massive cultural phenomenon within the entertainment industry and the gaming community at large. Critics and gamers alike were stunned by the unexpected depth, pathos, and humanity Hurst brought to the role, earning him numerous awards, nominations, and accolades that are rarely bestowed upon performers in the gaming world. He successfully humanized a Norse myth, turning a figure of ancient legend into a deeply relatable and painful study of generational trauma, addiction, and the desperate, late-stage struggle for self-redemption. This massive success marked a new high-water pinnacle in his career, showing that he was a dominant icon who could transcend the boundaries of a character actor to become the definitive, historical version of a legendary figure in the eyes of millions of people who had never seen his work on screen before. His work on Ragnarok was far more than just a job or a voice gig. It was a total soul-bearing reimagining of a god, proving that Hurst's ability to find the soul within the monster was a universal transferable skill that worked just as well in pixels as it did on film. He became a legend in the gaming world not by being the strongest character on screen, but by being the most vulnerable and broken, proving once again that true lasting strength is always found in the willingness to show the deep, jagged, and painful cracks in the armor. His Thor will be studied for years by game developers and actors alike as a benchmark for how to bring cinematic depth to video game characters, changing the medium forever and setting a new standard for narrative excellence in gaming. Perhaps the most surprising and deeply moving aspect of Ryan Hurst's life is the radical, almost unbelievable contrast between his violent, often terrifying on-screen persona and his incredibly peaceful, disciplined private existence away from the cameras. While he has earned his fame playing Hollywood's most violent warriors, broken bikers, and vengeful gods, Hurst has found his ultimate, lasting peace in the quiet, disciplined mantras of Sikhism and the rigorous, daily practice of Kundalini Yoga, adopting the spiritual name Gobind Seva Singh, which translates roughly to one who serves God through his actions and heart. Hurst is a deeply devoted spiritual practitioner who spends his hours off-set not in the party circles or red carpets of Hollywood, but in deep meditation, breathing exercises, and advanced spiritual study that anchors his soul. This grounding, ancient philosophy is precisely what allows him to navigate the chaotic, ego-driven, and often toxic waters of the modern film industry with a gentle, centered, and remarkably humble soul. He doesn't just do yoga as a fitness routine or a trend. He lives the profound philosophy of selfless service, mindfulness, and spiritual connection. This daily spiritual practice provides the necessary, life-saving balance to the intense, often dark, and traumatic emotional places he must go to inhabit his characters. It is the secret to his career longevity and his stellar reputation as one of the kindest, most professional, and most present individuals in the entire business. To truly understand Ryan Hurst, one must look past the muscles, the height, and the beard, and see that the giant is merely a physical shell. For a man dedicated to the lifelong quiet pursuit of inner peace and the humble service of others, in his everyday life a true warrior of the spirit who fights his battles with meditation rather than weapons, the extreme intensity and the soul-bearing vulnerability with which Hurst approaches every single one of his roles often raises a difficult, lingering question for fans and critics alike. What is the actual, long-term price of such profound artistic genius? Hurst is a firm and vocal believer in the deep psychology of acting, often spending many months living as a character, changing his diet, his sleep patterns, his physical movements, and his social interactions, long before the cameras even start rolling. This method approach, which he treats with the reverence of a religious rite or a sacred duty, is not about ego or vanity, but about a disciplined, almost painful search for human truth in its rawest, most unvarnished form. However, as we explore his views on the craft, it becomes clear that this level of total immersion takes a significant and lasting personal toll on his psyche and his overall well-being. He has spoken with refreshing, rare honesty about the immense difficulty of unplugging from characters like Opie Winston or Beta, men who carry so much darkness, trauma, and unresolved grief. For Hurst, acting is a form of emotional alchemy, a way of transforming his own personal experiences and the collective, often silent suffering of humanity into a performance that has the power to heal, provoke, or comfort the audience. He leaves absolutely nothing behind on the stage or the set, a discipline that makes him a director's ultimate dream, but demands a high, often invisible price from the man behind the mask. He views the craft of acting as a sacred, heavy responsibility, a way to explore the human psyche in its most extreme and uncomfortable states, ensuring that every role he takes is an honest reflection of the universal struggle to remain human in an often inhuman and chaotic world, an artist who sacrifices his own peace to give a voice to the voiceless. As we look back on a multifaceted, decades-spanning career that now encompasses film, television, and high-end interactive media, it is abundantly clear that Ryan Hurst has fundamentally redefined what it means to be a character actor in the 21st century. He has brought a profound, almost spiritual empathy to a rogues gallery of monsters, outlaws, soldiers, and gods, proving time and again that the most physically imposing and intimidating men are often the ones carrying the most delicate, bruised, and beautiful hearts. His enduring legacy is one of successfully and bravely transcending tropes. He refused to be confined by the walls of his own physicality, choosing instead to be the emotional and spiritual soul of every single project he touched. He has left an indelible, permanent mark on the entertainment industry as one of the most vital, underrated, and deeply soulful performers of his entire generation. Whether he is sacrificing his life in a cold prison yard for his brothers, stalking terrorized survivors through a decaying forest, or battling the literal end of the world as a broken and grieving God, Hurst's performances serve as a constant, powerful reminder that true, indestructible strength is always found in vulnerability and the courage to feel. History will remember him not just for the massive frame that filled the screen, but for the immense, tragic, and breathtakingly beautiful humanity he breathed into every single character he portrayed. Ryan Hurst remains a titan of the craft, a man who uses his immense size to make room for the smallest, most quiet, and most profound truths of the human soul, leaving a legacy of integrity and artistry that will inspire actors and audiences for generations to come, a true giant among men in every sense of the word.